Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a Modern Nonprofit podcast. I'm really excited to talk today with Libby. Remind me, Libby, your name Hikind, Libby Hikind. She is the founder of Grantwatch.com. Libby, I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with you. As we talked before, this is really relevant to the nonprofit clients we work with. So before we go ahead and get started, I just want to thank you for hopping on this conversation and talking a little bit more about the work you do and how you've been able to help nonprofits. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So Libby, I was able to check out your website. And before we kind of get started, I'll immediately throw a wild card at you, but I was looking at your grantwatch.com, and immediately what I thought is something that goes through my mind all the time. There must be a grant out there for this, right? Whether you are for profit, nonprofit, whatever your missions are, there has to be something, some resource out there that can help this idea get launched. So Libby, if you could tell us a little bit before we dive into the conversation. I usually like to wait until the end of our conversation to talk a little bit more about the work you do, but tell us a little bit in your own words what grantwatch.com is and what your hope is, what your goal was when you started this.
Well, Grantwatch is a website that lets nonprofits and businesses and some individuals know what grants are available. So what we do is we update the website every day. We add new grants, we archive the grants when they're past due, we review grants on a regular basis. When somebody comes to Grantwatch, they have multiple ways to do their searches, and they can find something for their idea or project, as you said. But they have to be very open. Very open, meaning don't go into the dress shop knowing exactly what you want. Be open, be flexible, because you may find something that a funding source wants to fund that you can do, but you never thought that was going to be your project. And that could bring funding to your organization. You can't always say, well, this is what we want to do exactly, because you're not going to find it. In the old days, people would come to me and say, Libby, we need this big monster Xerox machine. Remember, it took up a whole wall, right? And then there was a contract with it and everything. How can we get it? And I would say, well, there's not going to be a grant for that. But if you're sending out newsletters, at that point, we printed them out and the children took them home from school, right? Now we email them to parents. But if you were printing out newsletters, even though you need it for other things, you could get a percentage of the cost of that in your budget. And that's how you have to think of things. Don't think that we need exactly this. How can you incorporate what you need into what the funding source is looking for?
Gotcha. So I love
Want
that.
me to go back as to how I started this?
Yeah, we can talk about that here in a little bit. I would love to dive in a little bit more about how Grantwatch helps nonprofits, maybe specifically, and then I'd love to, I love hearing founder stories. I'm a founder myself on how we ended up in this space, but I noticed Grantwatch, like you said, it's not just nonprofits, but that's generally the audience for which, those are the individuals usually looking for grants. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the types of grants that are available for nonprofits on grantwatch.com or otherwise.
Well, what we did was we categorized the grants. We have about 59, sometimes 60 categories of grants. We add new categories as things change, what's trending, and where we're seeing all of a sudden a lot of grants come in. So during COVID, we actually added a COVID-19 coronavirus category. And right off the bat, my staff was so excited because there wasn't much that they could do sitting at home working remotely. So what could they do? And so they just went on this search and hunt, and everybody, well, I found another one, to the point where we got over 1,000 coronavirus grants up there. And it was great, helping a lot of people. So we categorize the grants, and you can look at the categories. They're on the right side of the website. And you can come to the website and say, well, the recipient is a nonprofit or a municipality, or the recipient of the grant would be a small business or an individual. And you can choose that recipient. And then you can choose your geographic focus. What state are you in, or are you in, we also serve Canada as well, and Israel and international. But we have a list of the states, provinces, territories, free, compact associations. We have all of that. And you can choose that. And then you can also choose what categories would you like to search in. So that's one way to go, and you'll be able to take a look, go through it, and come back to us, because we add new grants Sunday through Thursday, daily. And the number of grants on the website right now is over 7,000, which I'm really proud of that. I remember having a meeting with my staff when it was 3,500 and saying we have to keep going and keep going. And I kept seeing they were motivated and they kept adding. And this is a difficult thing because it's not a fixed kind of website. Grants come due and they have to be archived, right? And then you have to add new grants. So you're forever filling the shelves of the website, if you think about it as a grocery store, right? So we're constantly adding new grants. There's another way that a nonprofit can go in. They may have something specific. So whereas domestic violence, right? That is one of our categories. But you might want to look for trafficking. Maybe that's the word that you're looking for. So we have that keyword search. We also have a keyword phrase search. So you can go that way. Maybe you don't want a grant that has a deadline. You only want ongoing grants. You can search that way. We have many different ways to come in and come out of the website and locate something.
I love that. Well, and I think this is a really powerful tool. I talk with a lot of startup founders, right? That might have come from a law background, or they might have been a social worker, and they're used to the service delivery side of the business, but they have no idea how to even get started writing grants or where to go to find the grant. So Grantwatch seems to have taken a lot of that guesswork out for you. And that grants, especially during this pandemic, has been, even more relevant and even more of a need for the organizations, especially that I work with, but I would assume that's not unique to the clients that we work with. So tell me, because of the pandemic, have there been more grants posted and even more applicants than maybe in prior years? You had mentioned that you got some additional COVID grants, but what about the applicants? How has that correlation changed?
Well, we know that at some point when we started the pandemic, when we were about 120,000 people looking at the website in a month, and now it's over 180,000. So we know more people are so very much interested in looking for grants. Understand that businesses who really didn't have that much of an opportunity to get funding are finding grants nowadays, because the economic development that needs to happen right now, businesses have to retrofit a lot, right? And then of course there were grants specifically for COVID for businesses. So and then that got the foundations thinking, well, oh, this is an interesting space to move into besides nonprofits. So we're seeing a lot there as well. What else do you want me to tell you?
No, I think that's helpful. Yeah, no, that's helpful. So certainly more grants, but a lot more people looking at those grants. And interestingly, more, like you said, for-profit businesses rather than just nonprofits by default, or individuals looking to start businesses. I'm sure people have lost their jobs or lost their other businesses, or looking to keep their businesses afloat, regardless of what their tax status is. So that's really interesting. That's gone up that much.
The thing is that we should not be the place to go when you're going bankrupt. I just want to make that clear. A grant takes time. You have to write you have to create your response to an RFP, a request for proposal. You have to do it right. You have to review it, and then it goes to the funding source. And just because you submit it, the funding source doesn't decide tomorrow that you're getting funded. They go through a process. They if it's a state or a federal or even city grant, then they have a date basically as to when they expect to fund the grants. Foundations have to have a board meeting, and people have to review. They have to check that you've met all the eligibility requirements before you even get into the hopper of what they're actually going to look at. So start looking now. Now is the time to look, and have that wish list of what your organization really needs. Keep adding to it, so when somebody sees something, they know it's really on that list.
Well, what I'm hearing you say, and I think this is true for all businesses, but it takes some buildup to get the momentum going, and then it's not letting your foot off the gas, keeping that momentum going when you're grant writing, keeping that process going. all throughout the year. And I was talking with someone yesterday about the ratio of how many grants you should write versus what you would expect to get. I thought at one point, and nobody quote me on this, but I thought it was like 3-1. So if you need $1 million, you need to apply for $3 million worth of funding or something like this. I thought I've heard at one point. I don't know if that has crossed your desk or you've experienced anything like that as well. Just knowing, okay, if I need a budget for fundraising, how many grants should I expect to write? And it's like you said, much more than just because you write it, it's not a guarantee. Let's go with that.
Right. So if I go back to education, because by trade, I was an educator. Okay. And you want to run an after school program. Let's think about the people that you're going to need in that after school program and what else they're going to be doing. So you can think in terms of, well, I need a director, but that director may only be doing a third of their time of their 40 hours on your program, and then 2/3 on other programs. So you can apply and pinch that 1/3 if that funding source allows you to pay staff salaries. Sometimes it's only for equipment. Sometimes it's for staff. You have to juggle it around and see. So there's no rule of thumb that if you need 3 million, apply 1 million, apply for 3 million.
Right.
You can apply for that same 1 million, or you could break it up into 500,000 for different parts of your program, depending on what the funding source is really going to be willing to give you.
Right.
So
the little jigsaw puzzle.
Right.
Piece it all together.
Piece it together. And also you can talk about in-kind support. And you can include that, because if you have a building that's going to be used and it's open anyway, let's say during the time of the after school program, there is an adult education class going on. So that means the security guard is there already. You have a choice. If the security guard is being paid for from general operating expenses, you can use that as a half-time in-kind contribution. If it's coming from another grant, you can list that, that you're only taking 1/3 of the security guard for yours out of your budget, because the rest of the time is coming from somewhere else. You have to piece it together, and you have to have funding in case you don't get that particular piece. Where are you going to get it from? Where are you going to discontinue? And you can do a combination of crowdfunding and applying for grants. That's another way to go, and we have one that's connected to us, another website, uhelp.com. You can go there. You can hire a grant writer if your staff can't do it. There's many ways to go into this funding world.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to grants, what I've seen a bigger trend, especially because of the pandemic and some emergency funding that's become available, some have come in the form of loans or grants that may not be forgiven and convert to loans, or they're kind of assumed that they're loans unless you meet eligibility requirements. So are grants, easy to apply for? And how are these different than loans for some of these organizations?
Well, a grant does not need to be paid back, as long as you follow the instructions. If you take the money and you think it's your personal piggy bank, you're in trouble. Okay, that's how people go to jail. People should really realize that. And on Grantwatch, we've written articles about this different times. When you get funding, open up a separate checking account, and you can nickname your checking accounts from your business or your nonprofit, nickname it the title of the grant. And every single penny that you spend with grant funds needs to already been earmarked in your budget. If it's not in your budget, you have no right to use the money for that. If you want to use the money for that, you call up the funding source, write to them, get permission to do a budget modification. Because with a grant, you have to submit paperwork as to how you spent that money. You need every single receipt, everything documented. You should know, this because that's your field, right? And if you get a loan, then you're borrowing money to do whatever it is you've asked to borrow the money for. I believe that the funding agency for the loan can also come at you and say, did you use the money for that or not?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't borrow money for a car and then use it for a house, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to be honest and forthright with whatever you're doing. The
Mm-hmm.
difference with, so a loan has to be paid back, but we found this new thing called a forgivable loan that came out during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people that are being asked to pay it back.
Yeah.
Because if you get a forgivable loan through your bank, connected to the SBA, you know, the IRS, the whole connection there, you have to spend that money exactly how you said you're going to spend it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, then you owe the money. It's not going to be forgivable. And you have to be very, very careful, because once you spend money, how are you going to pay it back?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I agree. I've seen some situations where the eligibility was not met. There's very specific requirements to get those loans forgiven by way of converting to a grant. And even if you did use it for that purpose, what's important, if you don't have proof, meaning documentation to show this is where the money went, it's kind of, if you don't have proof, it didn't happen. So if you
Right.
can't prove that, it's kind of like you're guilty until proven innocent
If
when
you
it
didn't
comes to that.
if you didn't pay someone as a W-2 employee, as you said you would, and you just gave the money to your sister's cousin or something
In
like
cash.
that, you're right, in cash, that does not work. It doesn't fly. So you need somebody like yourself who can put something up on some kind of accounting software, right? And keep copious records. And it's also good if you're going to be paying things with a credit card, then get a credit card under that business name and only use it for that. Because I think there were some additional things in the latest round where you could use it for, there was broken windows that was listed in there, right? In the latest one. So if your windows needed to be repaired because they were hurt during COVID for some reason, then you would be needing to pay with a credit card.
Sure.
So then it should be listed, and if it's your credit card that's being used, reimburse it from the company money, but you need to keep it in your list. Otherwise, you get yourself in trouble. And people don't realize that paperwork is so important. It's the most important part of running any business, is to maintain that paperwork.
Completely agree. I tell people it's really the difference in reputation management. You know, even if there's nothing sketchy going on, if you don't have the paperwork to prove it, anyone can call into question your integrity or actions. And so if you're not good at paperwork, that's okay. There's people out there that are good at paperwork. Right. So hire those people to help them with it.
That's what I say. You need to know what your skills and abilities are. And yes, we all want to learn. And it would be great if I had time to take a QuickBooks course, okay? Right. Or if I had time to brush up on my Excel spreadsheet skills. If I need to do something, sometimes I'll figure out the formula and look it up online, but that's not the same as keeping and maintaining my books accurately.
Right.
Right. So you need to find the person, your person that you really trust, because the person that you hire has to log into your computer. They have to log into your bank accounts and download your credit card statements and everything else. You have to feel comfortable with that person. A lot of people will feel comfortable with you after your podcast, I'm sure. And you have to work through that. The same thing. If you cannot write a grant, but you really believe this grant is perfect for your organization, hire a grant writer. We have grant writer team. You can put up a request for a grant writer. It costs $50. It's like an advertising administrative fee. Okay. And then the grant writer will bid on your project, and you can decide which grant writer you want to use. And you work through a retainer and a system of deliverables. We try to build trust. So if the grant writer is going to take the project, give you a flat rate, break it up into pieces. Each piece that you get, you'll pay for. You'll continue. If you don't like the grant writer, you come back to us and say, Libby, we're not happy. Then we just clone out your request and get you someone else, and you start over with somebody else. Most of the time it works. And you just have to know, what can you do as a CEO, as a founder of a company? What are your skills? what you know you do very well. That's why you're in the business of whatever business you're in. And what you don't know, hire out. Right? But then, of course, don't spend your budget too far, because then you can't pay anybody else. You have to have that balance.
That's true. So, this is another question I get oftentimes. We talk about some of these, what seemingly seem like luxuries in the nonprofit space. We talked a little bit about hiring out individuals, especially on some of these administrative tasks. And people will say to me all the time, Tasha, we just don't have the budget for it. And Libby, maybe we should talk offline sometime, but I'm very interested in helping people figure out ways to fund their infrastructure, really adding capacity, helping their administrative team. And you probably hear this a lot in the years that you've been doing this work, that many funders want to pay programmatic expenses only. So they have to figure out ways to fund some of these other categories that aren't readily available with common funders. And you had mentioned that there's categories on your website, and I noticed that. But let's talk about what types of categories are out there, and then actually kind of dovetailing off the last little bit of conversation we had. Are there categories for things like administrative expenses, capacity building, paying for an accountant, paying for a grant writer? Do you know if there's any of those categories out there? And if not, or if so, what kind of categories are there?
So we're talking two different things right now. There's categories of grants, and then there are within the budget what categories you can put in. So most funders will not pay for a grant writer, because they believe that you should be able to speak well about your organization and write your own proposal. You should have that capacity within. So what can you do? If you don't have the funding for a grant writer, you have a few options. You could raise money from someone that supports your organization and say, look, if you give us X number of dollars, we can hire a grant writer, and that is going to bring and make us more money. So you're helping us in a tremendous way. That seed money for the grant writer will be very helpful. And whatever a grant writer does, even if you don't receive that grant award, you now have a great piece of writing that you can tweak. And at some point, you can just write the grant yourself. You can do some small applications yourself. You asked me before, how difficult is it to write a grant? So if it's a 1-pager or a 2-pager online, you may not need a grant writer. But if it's a 100-page application, you definitely need a grant writer. So you have to take a look at the application and try to do a little bit of it yourself. Save some money by gathering all the paperwork yourself that's needed. So that's one way. Now, when we talk about accounting, then there is, especially in federal government grants, there is a portion of a grant that can be used for administrative services. And I think it's the direct, the word for it escapes me at the moment, but there is a place for it, and your accounting would be in there. And in a federal grant, it asks you, who's managing the funds? What's your financial accountability? And you have to write a whole process of how the checks are double signed, who approves it, how, what happens from invoice to payment, right? Allocation of resources. And you need to write, well, did you ever have any funding previously? How did that work out for you? So that's, like, did you manage, how much funds have you managed in the past? So if you haven't, having a good agency behind you and being able to say, we employ or we contract out with this and this agency, and they manage the funding, and these are the checks and balances that we have. So that's really important. And there is funding there. Smaller foundation grants, probably not.
So I think a lot of people get really overwhelmed when they start dabbling in the grant writing space. Obviously, you've probably interacted with many of these small organizations, and when they start getting anxiety about this or struggle to have confidence in it, what do you tell them that grants are doable for small nonprofits or individuals looking to get this thing off the ground? What would you say to those individuals?
I say, write your first grant yourself without a grant writer. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it looks like. Just get it together, because when you do that, you gather all these documents that need to be in your online and your hard copy folder that will be needed in future grants. So you're going to, this is a way to save money. Write your first grant yourself. Do something small. That's going to help focus your agency. Maybe you don't have a mission statement written. Maybe whatever the accountant did initially when you opened it up, when you did it yourself, was just a one-liner, and it's really not appropriate. Maybe you want to rework that now. Maybe your board isn't appropriate for what you're doing. And I know you help with that as well, right? So, right, because like on a Head Start grant, I remember they wanted certain types of individuals with certain background in their careers on that board. And a lot of preschools didn't have that. You know, they had their mother, their brother, their sister, whatever, because they started small and now they've grown and they're going to Head Start. So write your first grant yourself, go through everything, and forgive yourself if you don't win. That's the way to go. And then you're going to really be ready, and you're going to really see the need for all these different pieces that have to go into the application and where you need the help. That's how I see it. And I wrote my first grant. You know, I wasn't a grant writer, and I wanted to get my class into a computer room. I was teaching special ed at the time, and there was a test in the junior high in those years. It later became an intermediate school, that special ed students, even though they may have been low functioning, they had to take this test and they had to pass this test. And it just came out that, you know, and there was no allowances or whatever, and nobody would be promoted in those years. And if you would give I was teaching a class for emotionally handicapped. That's what it was called then. It later became, you know, they took off the stigma, they called it Ms. 2. But if you would give a student a paper back with red marks on it or any kind of corrections, they just take it, throw it at you. That's the kind of class I had. 10 students and 1 para. So that should give you even a better idea. Okay, no medication was given to children in those years in school to help with behavioral issues. Now, and I'm not promoting that. I'm just trying to describe the situation. Okay. So now I needed to take my class into the computer room because I read about word processing. This is the 1980s. And I read that, you know, and I'm reading this and I'm saying, wow, if my students could be playing on the computer and then they could correct their work and not have to rewrite it, this would be phenomenal. Wasn't available. My principal said, listen, Libby, if you go into that computer room, you have to be responsible for the computers. Nobody else will take your class. That's what my class was like. So I go in there and I start trying to teach myself enough to teach them. And the computers were the old model Tandy Model 4s, big computers with a screen, and, you know, everything was attached. Not enough memory for word processing. So now I needed to figure out how I'm going to get funding, sent my special ed supervisor to the district office with a list of what we need. And he comes back and goes, they said, Libby, there's no money, which to me was such a shocker. They were throwing so much money into special education in those years. No money. But the superintendent said, if you want to come after school every day, they will teach you how to write a grant, because a grant is available from Tandy for the Model 100 to, if you could prove how it could be used in the educational setting. I have never written a grant before. The only thing I was involved in at that point was writing press releases. I was learning that in my educational administration supervision course. So I went. I mean, like, okay, you're going to teach me something for free and maybe it's going to work. So I went after school every day, and I kept writing, and then somebody kept looking at it and giving me ideas back and forth. And I would ask, what is this? I never heard these words before, you know, this is grant language. And I won.
Nice.
That's the thing. And I won even with the worst possible scenario. I was using Commodore 64, and I didn't know to save my work after every version or whatever. I put my legs under my desk, kicked out the plug, and everything, 23 pages got erased. So the worst possible situation, it still worked. I rewrote it, I won.
Love it.
And they only gave out 4 in the United States. And this was, think about a Model 100 is like an iPad. That's what it was, like an iPad with a keyboard that actually, the key, you could press the keys. Okay. So it wasn't like on an iPad where it's just a screen, but the screen itself was about 6 inches, maybe by 11, 6 inches straight across, green screen. But that's the beginning of everything that we have today. That's so compact and small.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but I won, and you don't always win, but the thing is that I tried. I really tried. And even if I wouldn't have won, I would have had a great piece of work that I could go and use for something else, which I did. I then wrote a Commodore 64 grant. I'm really dating myself. And it was a matching grant of $9,000. The first one was $15,000 for equipment. And the Commodore 64 was a $9,000 matching grant. And I used a lot of the information that I had in my first grant. So I wasn't really writing, I wasn't starting from scratch. And that's what my advice is to everyone. Use whatever you do, take it, tweak it. You have Office, Microsoft Word, you can use that and move things around and you get it. And then, so this way, if you feel what you're doing, if that's your business plan, you want to apply for 3 separate $1 million grants at the same time, well, you've written your first one, you can definitely use it for the next one. The question that
absolutely
comes up all the time, can I apply for the same thing from 3 different funding sources?
Yeah.
Yes, you can. You wouldn't do it so the answer is 3 different funding sources. Okay. So if you have 3 different funding sources, you apply to open up a class for preschool, a preschool class, and you actually win 3 different grants to open up a class for preschool. Well, what happens is now you can open up 3 classes. You cannot take the 3 different grants and fund that one class because you've asked for a teacher, you've asked for furniture, all sorts of things for that classroom. So now you're going to open up 3 classes and you're going to have to figure out how you're going to attract enough students to your location to do that. And if you can't, then you have to give back.
Sure.
Right. So that's how you have to look at it.
Love that.
Like what happens if we do win? Can we expand the program? And if, let's say, the grant was to do conservation efforts in one state, and you write in the proposal that you'd like to do it in 3 states, but you're going to start in this state. Now you've left yourself open to apply the 2 other grants. And of course, you put the lead state in each of the other 2 and possibly go back to the funding source if you get all 3 and switch it around. So that's how you play with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you've had personal success with that. So Grantwatch is at least a great place to get started on all of that. Like you said, I absolutely agree. Try writing some of the grants yourself. If people are interested in hearing more about the work that you're doing or how to get in touch with Grantwatch, I guess what's the easiest place? Just go to your website?
Go to grantwatch.com. We have a phone number, 561-249. You might have to edit that out. Sure. Yeah. It's up there. I don't call myself but I do it. You should know that a lot of times I answer the phone myself, only because I want to reach out and touch people. And you can write us at support@grantwatch.com. That's another way to reach us. And fantastic. What else can I tell you? I think that there is one thing that we should mention at the end is that when you write a grant, you start with the budget. Always start with the budget. And so if you do need help from an accountant to set up your spreadsheet so that the formulas are in there, that's a good thing to do. Yes. I always set that up myself because I learned a little bit of Excel. I was teaching it years ago. So, but you want to put the formulas in because then you can say, this staff person, this is their salary, and I need a certain portion of that salary for this program. And then when it comes down and you wait a minute, they're only going to give me X amount of dollars and I went too high, you might be lowering that salary, or you might be lowering what you put in for postage, or you might be lowering what you put in for supplies. You're going to keep adjusting. So you have to put your formulas inside your budget into an Excel spreadsheet in order to play with it. And that is the foundation of every grant, the budget.
Agreed. I can't tell you how many times I see grant budgets or grant applications that have been written and at the very end, we need a budget. It's like, well, what are we asking for at this point? What do we
Oh,
need?
no.
Or we've already over asked for that program. We've already over fundraised for that program is we kind of alluded to before, with getting too many grants for one cause. And then what are we going to do? How are we going to spend the money or expand the program?
But it
Well,
also,
Libby, this is,
when you write a grant, every single thing that you write in the budget needs to be mentioned in the proposal. So you have to have the budget first, because if you're talking about, if let's say you're talking about a program and you're asking for iPods, right? So then every time you speak about that program, you need to mention those iPods, because when they review the budget, they're going to say, you want 50 iPods? For what? Cross it off.
Sure. Absolutely. Great point. Well, Libby, this has been really, really helpful. And I think your website is going to be incredibly helpful for all the people listening to this. So thank you so much for coming on today, sharing a little bit more about grant writing in general, and then also your database that will help, I think, it be much easier to match up those nonprofits with the funding sources that are out there. So thank you again for being on, and this has been great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great.
Bye.